What we're talking about here, what we think corporates need to do is to assess what we're calling polarization risk. And there's a threshold here. Below that threshold, there is perfectly reasonable, perfectly normal scrutiny from stakeholders, inquiring about what corporates are engaged in. Perfectly reasonable. Above that threshold, you get into different territory where there is misinformation, deep emotion, entrenchment of attitudes, all sorts of things. And we think that there are three factors for corporates to assess and consider in thinking about where is our polarization risk? Is it below or above this threshold? Those three factors, first one, what's the spread or division of opinion on a particular topic? So if we go back to Arla, are you for or against Bouvier and this whole issue, right? And what's the distribution? And specifically, how strong are the poles, right? Polarization, right? Second thing, degree of politicization. What we mean by that is, underneath the presenting issue, what's going on in terms of interests and beliefs and attitudes and opinions? So if we go back to Arla, okay, we've got this additive. Okay, what are the attitudes of key stakeholders in terms of what are their attitudes to climate? What are their attitudes to expertise and science? What are their attitudes to control of food or freedom of food? Right? Those deep political interests are actually really important to understand. And then the third corner of this triangle is around distance from shareholders. Where are you as a corporate relative to other stakeholders? And how are they close to you or are they far from you? And the interesting thing about this is this sounds like common sense. In a polarized world, there is greater scope for misperception of what other people think, because we are all egocentric.
So we wanted to illustrate how a business can understand this polarization risk triangle that Ben's just described through the use of research and data. So to inform our thinking, we recently polled 4,000 members of the UK public and 1,000 members of the US public to understand polarization risk on a number of key issues and strategic actions that businesses regularly need to communicate about. So we thought we'd take a deep dive look at one of those, and in this case it's DE&I. What this graph shows is how divisive DE&I is as an issue currently. Respondents were asked how warm or cold they feel towards a company delivering DE&I initiatives, with 100 being very warm, i.e. in favour, and 0 being very cold, i.e. not in favour. Now the green area shows the feelings of the UK respondents. The lighter purple area shows the feelings of the US respondents, and the darker purple area shows the sentiment of combined feelings across both sides of the pond. Now, as you can see, the division of opinion, the polls at the far left and the far right of the graph, are significant, particularly in the US. So let's go back to that risk triangle. The first of the three facets of polarization risk for a business is simply to determine if a division of opinion exists in terms of how people feel towards the issue. And in the case of DE&I, the answer at the moment is, as you might expect, a resounding yes. Now, the second aspect of understanding polarization risk is to determine how politicized the issue that a business is acting on happens to be. Crudely speaking, the more politicized an issue, the higher the chance it is to be imbued with identity-led values, making it more contentious and loaded. And this graph shows how politicized DE&I policies currently are. Each small dot represents a respondent's view. Their views are mapped by their warmth towards D&I policies on the vertical y-axis, and their political views map literally left to right on the x-axis. The blue trend line indicates how politicized the issue is. A steep downward trending line would suggest the issue in question is strongly politicized, whereas a flatter horizontal line would suggest the issue is more apolitical in nature. So, in the case of D&I policies, the data shows a steep line, suggesting the issue is currently highly politicized. So going back to that polarization risk triangle, we can now see that D&I is both divides opinion and is politically charged. The third and final aspect of understanding polarization risk is judging whether the action a business is taking jars with the identity-based values of the corporate brand that is communicating it. Now that matters because if there is a dissonance between the values inherent in an action a corporate takes and the values of the brand itself, the chance of a backlash against it increases hugely. Now that backlash could emanate from customers, employees, a retail or investor base, even an institutional investor base that thinks that the business in question is behaving in a way which betrays the identity-based values that they believe they share with the brand. For example, the recent polarised backlash against the Jaguar rebrand was partly because there was significant dissonance between the value of Jaguar's existing largely conservative customer base and the progressive social values that the advert was implicitly advocating. So going back to our data, these graphs show how different brands carry different degrees of politically polarising views. Here we have looked at how politically polarising Primark is compared to the BBC, two obviously very different, two different corporate brands. Again, a steep trend line suggests a brand is very politically polarised, whereas a flat one suggests it is less so. And on the left-hand side, we can see that Primark is a relatively flat trend line, suggesting it is not that politically polarising in nature, whereas the graph on the right-hand side shows the BBC trend line is steeper, suggesting it is more politically polarising. And from a reputation and communications point of view, that matters, because if Primark was to, for example, change its D&I policies, the reaction would be very different and probably less intense than if the BBC was to do so. So in summary, revisiting the polarisation risk triangle, we are able to fully unpack how much polarisation risk is inherent in a business currently communicating a D&I action. Firstly, we asked, does D&I currently divide opinion? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. Secondly, we explored the degree to which D&I is politicised. Currently, it's highly politicised. And thirdly, we explored how different brands may open up a values-based dissonance with their stakeholders should they communicate on a politicised, divisive issue such as D&I. If a polarising corporate brand, such as the BBC, was to communicate a new D&I policy, then a large dissonance could definitely exist with certain stakeholder groups. So putting these factors together, you can conclude that the current polarisation risk inherent in acting on D&I is meaningfully high and a chance of a backlash very real. For any corporate affairs professional, any communication strategy would therefore need careful thought and planning.